We love our cars. Back in 1991, there were 250 cars per 1,000 people in Ireland. These days, there's 400. There are now 2 million vehicles in this country, and our dependence on the car is the most serious threat to our environment. Our road networks are clogged with commuters, and when the system breaks down, the result is gridlock.
Northbound traffic is slow from junction 13 Dundrum through to the toll plaza. N2 very heavy slip onto the M50 northbound is particularly heavy there off junction 9.
M50 northbound, junction 14, toll plaza, disaster.
Okay, M50 solid.
Running bypass is extremely heavy. It's back around 600 from Blanchardstown outbound, bumper to bumper.
It wasn't always like this. Ireland once had an extensive railway network. This abandoned track is one of hundreds of miles of derelict railway lines around the country. In the 1950s, we shut down dozens of tracks and stations because of economic recession and a growing perception that the train was a thing of the past.
We had a superb railway network back, the early 1900s, and in fact a great tram system in the city as well. And we looked at them as loss-making things, a loss-making service. Now, we should never have looked at it from that point of view. We should have said, this is providing a public service, which costs so much money to provide.
As the railways became redundant, the way was cleared for a new era in Irish transport.
The automobile is part of any American scene.
The American way of life dominated the Western world in the 1950s, and the message was clear: buying a car would make you free. And here in Ireland, we gleefully bought into this American dream, changing the very fabric of our cities and towns to accommodate this wondrous new invention.
Today, suburban construction is more than 3 times the construction in the city.
The big expansion of the city occurred after 1950, which is in the period of world history when the motor car predominated.
When we began to get a bit more prosperous and the economy was beginning to move and car ownership was growing all the time, our philosophy was the car was the way to go. And the car was a kind of a status symbol. Everybody wanted to have a car. So we kind of forgot about the public transport system, stopped investing in it, and the car then emerged as the way of travel.
And this love affair has grown even more passionate in the past few years.
I think the car has become a modern icon in Ireland. I mean, the ultimate Celtic Tiger icon is the SUV sitting in traffic, going nowhere, moving slower than walking pace. People mightn't be aware of the ongoing costs of a car once you leave the showroom with your brand new motor, and it's believed on average that a car will cost you $11,000 per annum. It costs you 70 cents per kilometre to drive your car. So maybe people might think about their next trip to the shop in that context.
And there's another cost as well: the hours lost commuting and stuck in traffic jams. David Quinn and his wife, Mary Louise, travel from Navan to Dublin to work every day.
A lot of people I would know would be in the same boat as us, yes, because the house prices has pushed us out this far from Dublin. Our alarm would go off at about 5:45 in the morning. Our sales ready first, and then attend to our daughter Tara. Wouldn't even have time to dress her in her pyjamas. We put the jacket on and into the car and on to the childminders. I'd say about 36 to 37 miles each way. Every minute is timed, so every minute is important. It's very, very busy and fast, and by the end of the week you do feel that you're tired.
When we were both living in Dublin, you have much more choice of how to get to work. Like, you have your bus, you have your dart, or you can drive as well if you want, but when we came out here first, it was like car only. There's nothing else really.
The traffic every year is actually getting much worse, so the traffic coming into Navan now is beginning to back up coming into the town.
I suppose when you come out this far, you have no choice but to drive.
People can't afford houses in Dublin. They move out to buy cheaper houses in places like Navan and Ace and so on. Now, they don't factor in the cost of travel. If they did so, the house in Dublin might be more economical in the long term.
The future of long-distance commuting is in serious doubt due to the rising price of petrol. A commute from Kells to Dublin currently costs around €70 per week. Rising oil prices could see that increase to as much as €115 per week in the near future, around the cost of €100,000 on your mortgage. And perhaps more worryingly, our car-dependent culture is having a serious impact on our environment and on the future of the planet. Transport has been the driving force behind the increase in Ireland's CO2 emissions. We have the highest greenhouse gas emissions in the EU, with the exception of Luxembourg, emitting 17 tonnes of CO2 per person per year, compared to the European average of 11 tonnes. Our CO2 emissions are growing out of control, and the chief culprit is our old friend, the car.
Well, emissions and pollution from transport have risen by 144% since 1990, and as a share of Ireland's total climate pollution, transport has doubled its share in that time.
The problem is that we are driving more and more in bigger and bigger cars. The average commute has increased by nearly 50%, from 11 kilometres in 1996 to nearly 16 kilometres today.
And all that driving means a lot of petrol. And for every litre of petrol burnt, 2.3 kilograms of CO2 are emitted into the atmosphere.
An SUV or a luxury saloon will emit almost 7 tonnes of CO2 every year on average, compared to 3 tonnes for a modest family car and 2 tonnes of CO2 for this hybrid car. So an SUV emits more than 3 times as much as the hybrid car. And cars pump many other toxic pollutants into the atmosphere. Our emissions of the acidifying gas nitrogen dioxide are twice as much as the target set by the EU Emission Ceiling Directive. CO2, acid gases, urban sprawl, the rising price of oil.
Cars are a problem we must tackle. So where do we start?
Every journey we make begins and ends on foot. Walking is such an important form of transport, it seems amazing that our cities are becoming more and more difficult to navigate on foot.
You have a relatively unpleasant urban environment on the streets. Pedestrians feel corralled, they don't get that much opportunity to cross the street, the traffic is given priority, and so on. All of that kind of thing needs to be dealt with, because at any given time of the day and night, there are more people walking on the streets of the city than there are cars.
Our sprawling new suburbs, like Blanchardstown in West Dublin, seem specifically designed to alienate the pedestrian.
This is a typical out-of-town shopping centre, developed at the intersection of the M50 and the N3, and it's entirely built around the car.
The geography of these new car-dependent suburbs, which can be found all over the country, in West Dublin, East Galway City and Dundalk, is based on the model of Los Angeles, where buildings spread over a massive area, connected by endless roads, with all shops and other destinations marooned at the centre of vast car parks. And it's not just shopping centres that discriminate against the pedestrian. New housing estates are often designed to suit drivers and lack even the most basic facilities for walking. And prioritising the car in urban centres has undermined the most perfect and effective mode of transport ever invented, the bicycle. The bicycle is the world's most efficient piece of engineering. It covers more ground per energy expended than any other invention. Bicycles permeate the streets, taking up virtually no road or parking space and emitting no pollution. Cycling could be a healthy, enjoyable and fast way to move around our cities.
I think people are beginning to see it's a quick way to beat congestion, and it's a handy way to get around town. No parking hassles, lots of health benefits. You feel better in body and mind, your brain is working better. So I think people are beginning to see the benefits of cycling again. There's huge potential in Dublin to get a lot more people on bikes. At the moment in the morning peak, around 2/3 of trips are under 6 kilometres, which will take about 20 minutes on a bicycle. And at the moment, only 5% of those trips are done by bike. About 30 or 40 or 50% of those trips should be by bike.
We need to make cycling safer, and that means slowing down traffic by introducing a 30-kilometre speed limit in urban areas and getting rid of one-way systems in our city centres. But you can't walk or cycle everywhere, and to travel long distances without harming the environment, people need a real alternative.
What we need to solve the transport crisis from a climate change perspective are at least three things: investment in public transport, incentives for people to switch from private to public transport, and information so they know why they're doing it and what the point is.
The point is quite clear. This is your annual carbon emission if you drive an average car as a single occupant. The comparison with travelling the same distance in other modes, such as public transport, is quite startling. If you choose to drive alone in your SUV, you'll emit over 30 times more CO2 than a passenger in a half-full train. We need to move towards public transport as soon as possible.
Our big problem is we don't have a good enough public transport system. We're moving in that direction at last, but we're so far behind that it's going to take us a long time to catch up.
After decades of underinvestment, the regeneration of our transport system has already begun.
When we were proposing Lewis initially, and even when we started constructing it, there was a fair bit of objection to it. Nobody really had an idea of what Lewis itself was going to look like, and I think everybody was surprised that it was such an elegant vehicle.
When the Lewis first went live, you could sit on the tram and you could hear people talking about how nice it was.
That whole aspect of its appearance, how it fits into the landscape, it's not intrusive, to me is a very, very good piece of design work. While the sceptics thought it wasn't going to do any good, the fact that it's carrying 50, maybe 60 or 70,000 people per day proves it's working very well.
Good public transport, good quality public transport, enables people in all sorts of ways to feel proud of their city.
The Lewis shows that Irish people will use public transport if it's done right.
But high-profile transport projects like Lewis won't solve all our problems.
I think the first priority is buses, really. I mean, if I was in charge of transport in Dublin, I would provide at least 100 more buses, if not 200. The vast bulk of public transport passengers in Dublin travel by bus.
The Quality Bus Corridor programme was greeted with scepticism, but appears to have worked. This QBC carries 31,000 people per day, in the process removing 25,000 cars from the road.
And we've proven that a good quality bus corridor can carry about 3.5 times the number of people on the buses than in the adjacent traffic lane. And also can do it maybe in up to maybe half the time.
So people can be tempted onto buses, but it's still often a frustrating experience for the customer. The overcomplicated fare structure means it's difficult to predict how much change you'll need. And trying to find out when your bus is going to arrive is a real challenge.
You stand at a Dublin bus stop and try to find out how to get to your destination. You will find a rather incomprehensible piece of information which tells you when the bus left the garage. Now, this is fascinating, but it's of absolutely no use to you because it doesn't tell you when the bus will arrive, and it's not very easy to work out where it's actually going to.
Dublin Bus is currently trialling a real-time information system based on GPS technology to let waiting passengers know when the bus will arrive. Because of budget constraints in the past, this system only works on a couple of routes. The key advantage of QBCs and the Lewis is that passengers can accurately predict when they'll arrive at their destination.
Reliability, I think, is the most important thing that you have to deliver in terms of public transport. The importance about that is not the length of time that it takes you to travel from any point to another point, is can you predict in advance the time of arrival? Because it's always the time of arrival at your destination that's important. It takes out the stress out of travelling, that sort of surface travel, and taking that stress and wasted time, to me, is what makes a good quality public transport system.
Delivering reliable services means separating public transport from our congested roads. There's now a prospect of delivering the required major revamp of our public transport system under the Transport 21 plan.
Transport 21 clearly represents a step change in the level of public investment in Ireland, and in particular in Dublin. So in that sense, it's a dramatic change. For the first time, we actually have a plan for transport infrastructure for the city.
Although Transport 21 includes a massive investment in our motorway network, it also contains large amounts of money for public transport projects.
It has the start of the metro system. Metro North and Metro West will be part of that plan. There's extensions to the existing Lewis lines. There's a new Lewis line coming in from Lucan. There's a further upgrade of the Dart. The Kildare Route project, which is doubling the tracks from Hazelhatch into Houston, and the interconnector, which is going to be a very significant element of the future network. That's connecting Houston Station to the Docklands and on to the Northern Railway line underground, an underground tunnel. So that'll be a very significant piece of infrastructure. All of that's packaged in Transport 21 to be delivered over the next 10 years. And I'm very excited about that because I can see the elements of our plan kind of being delivered in front of my eyes.
Transport 21's highest profile project is the Dublin Metro. The first line, Metro North, will run from Stephen's Green to Lisenhall in North County Dublin via O'Connell Street, the Mater Hospital, Drumcondra, DCU, Ballymun, the airport and Swords. The Metro will be a similar service to the Lewis, but with some important differences. It will be completely segregated from roads, allowing longer carriages and higher frequencies, which means waiting times will be much shorter and the system will carry more passengers.
What the metro system affords us is a high-frequency, dedicated line which guarantees us up to probably in excess of 25,000 people travelling in a peak period.
The Lewis will be improved. The two existing lines will be linked and extended, and a new line will be built to Lucan in West Dublin via Liffey Valley. The Dart will be extended throughout the Dublin area, involving the electrification of the existing lines to Hazelhatch, Balbriggan and Maynooth, as well as a proposed new line between Dublin and Navan. Possibly the most important part of the plan is the interconnector, an underground rail link between Houston and a new rail station in Dublin's Docklands, with stops at the Liberties, Stephen's Green and Pearse Station, connecting the city's mainline railway stations to the Dart, Metro and Lewis.
Successful public transport system is all about the network, and the network is all about connections and interchange.
We can't look simply at one line when we talk about the metropolitan system. We've got to look at the entire network, because the entire network will be made extremely weak if central links are not of sufficient capacity.
I mean, I think the fundamental thing that needs to be done with transport in Dublin is to integrate it.
Integration is vital. The more connections in a system, the more useful it is for passengers.
I mean, Lewis has been a tremendous success, there's no doubt about that, even though, of course, the two lines don't join up yet in the city centre because the government couldn't get their heads around the notion of sacrificing road space in Dawson Street and Nassau Street to cater for trams. We're the only country in the world that has done something like that, because that has meant that you had to build two depots to station the trams in. And that's something that normal people wouldn't do. The idea of extending Lewis makes sense. The idea of creating a network makes sense.
And integrating the way we pay our fares will make the system easier to use.
If you want to have sustainable transport, people have to use it without having to think in great detail about the journeys they're going to make. And they need to be able to change from one mode to the other without having to make complicated plans. The simple way to ensure that is integrated ticketing. In other words, you buy a ticket and you can use it on the different modes. That has been planned, I think, in Dublin for about 5 years, if not more. As of this moment, we only have the most rudimentary forms of integrated ticketing.
Today I use 3 tickets changing from bus to Lewis to Dart. But in the future, we'll have one smart card, which will make it so much easier.
There's no point knowing how to travel on the tram system if it doesn't also connect up with how to travel on a bus system or travel on the Dart system. We haven't got a connected up travel information system at the moment.
People don't have, if you like, in their heads a map of the bus system. Contrast that with most cities' maps. Most Londoners, for example, have in their heads a map of the London Underground. Most people know how the London Underground works, which lines there are, where they go to, whatever. The same in Paris, the same in Frankfurt, wherever. Dublin can't even provide basic information about the transport facilities that do exist.
You could ask why. Well, let's put it this way, looking around the world at various cities around the world, I haven't come across any example where either integrated ticketing or integrated information has been provided without being regulated for. In other words, there wasn't a kind of consensus among the operators to provide it, but the government had to say do it. It's as simple as that.
But to really make the best use of a public transport network, we need to fundamentally reimagine our urban environment by integrating development with transport planning. The benefits of living near public transport are so clear that high-density developments like these ones in Dundrum are already springing up around Lewis. In the future, we could see entire communities built around railway stations.
From the beginning of your trip, you can walk to public transport, and at the end of your trip, you can walk from the public transport to your final destination. That's the key thing that we want to achieve.
Well, I think, the idea of linking urban development with public transport is such a no-brainer that it should have been done from the very beginning. But we failed to do that until fairly recently. But we're now building new suburbs, new style suburbs, if you like, such as Pelletstown, which is near Ashtown and the Navan Road, which not only look different, but are intended to function in a completely different way, where there are going to be good public transport links, both by rail and bus.
The Cork Area Strategic Plan links land use to public transport by focusing development of the city's eastern port area around the reopening of the Cork to Middleton Railway. The Western Rail Corridor will create new development opportunities based on a rail link from Ennis to Claremorris via Tuam and Athenry. In the city centres, the car must be relegated into fourth place behind walking, cycling and public transport, in the process creating tranquil new public spaces instead of the traffic-snarled intersections of today.
We may think of O'Connell Street as the main street, but College Green is the great set piece. And, it is a profoundly unpleasant place at the moment, and it could be great. And it was great in the past before it was invaded by cars. That is something that needs to be restored to the city and to the people of Dublin. And I think that when a Lewis line is run through it, that will have a profound effect in terms of calming the level of traffic and making it a more pleasant place all around.
One of the things that marks out the great European cities is that they have public spaces. Dublin potentially has some wonderful public spaces. The most obvious public space is College Green. At the moment, it's essentially a traffic roundabout. And it's very difficult to imagine it as anything else but a traffic roundabout. If you talk about blocking it, pedestrianising it, running the Lewis through it, people will say, well, what about all the cars? 40 years ago, the Campo in Siena was a traffic roundabout. Now it's pedestrianised. People sit in cafes, people talk to each other. It is the tourist destination of Siena. In College Green and that area around there, we have a potential world-class public space, not just somewhere for cars to go.
Kicking our addiction to the car could renew our cities. But it's also crucial to the future of the planet.
Tackling climate change is really urgent. The scientists tell us we have about 10 years to start to make the shift, to make that global climate pollution peak and begin to come down. And that means in Ireland and places where we're already high up in our terms of emissions, we have to act immediately. We've seen that transport is one of the biggest contributors to global climate change and pollution, and therefore any effort to tackle climate change in Ireland means getting people out of their cars and into public transport as soon as possible. So all that leaves is the political will, the public motivation to do it, and we can begin to make this shift happen.
And with the growing scarcity of oil and the rising CO2 levels putting the planet in jeopardy, this is one battle we cannot afford to lose.